Hey Computer, play About Bees podcast.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back once again for another episode of About Bees, Culture, and Curiosity. With, in no particular order,
Bidzina and Ron.
okay,
Oh,
Bidzina and Ron.
sorry, I thought we just went silent there. I saw that. Yeah, but Ron, we're here today with Bidzina Mosiashvili and Ron Miksha, or I don't know. How should we do? You left me off to the wolves there, Ron.
That's absolutely fine. The wolves won't eat you here. Okay, so we're good to go then. We're going to start this episode. We are talking today about something that a lot of people are wondering, and that's whether they should get packaged bees, whether packages are a smart idea, a pretty dumb idea. And if you do get them, what do you do with them? How do you handle them? How do you treat them? So that's going to be today's topic. It's going to be bees in a package. So we're going to be talking
Yes.
about those bees in a package. But first, Betzina, I would kind of like to draw people's attention in general, anybody listening out there who has the remotest interest in two of my favorite things, one being bees of any sort, and the other being travel, particularly in Europe. Apimondia 2025. It's only a few months away now. September 23rd to 27th, 2025. That's this year. Apimondia is being held in Copenhagen, or as I think they say over there, Copenhagen. So in Copenhagen this year, they expect to see several thousand people attending, talking, having a great time, learning about bees of all sorts. I hope I'm speaking there. I submitted my abstract for a talk, and I'll know in mid-April. I'll let everybody here who's listening to the podcast know whether or not I'm going to be one of the presenters. But, as we go on, Bidzina will bring up Copenhagen from time to time just to remind people that Apimondia is something you don't have to be a member of Apimondia, but you will have to pay to get into the conference. And it is a few dollars, but if you can kind of tuck that into a vacation or a once in a lifetime trip, in this case to Denmark. Actually, this will be a twice in a lifetime trip for me because I did have the intense pleasure of traveling to Denmark about 30 years ago. I went up through, no, not that long ago, about 20 years ago. About 20 years ago, I drove all around Europe in a big, huge circle. And the furthest north I made it was Aarhus, which is in the main peninsula that's attached to Hamburg area of Germany. Beautiful country. I mean, yeah, we all know that's gloomy, doomsday kind of, people who aren't very friendly. They're grumpy most of the time. They have nothing to be grumpy about. They have a very high standard of living. It's a great place that they should be celebrating every day. Um, but I think, to get back to Denmark and see Copenhagen this time, which I had missed before, is pretty exciting for me. So are you going to be there?
When I hope I am. I do want to be there. Yeah, this is something that I could essentially plan for, but to be honest, I don't think I will be able to make it. That will be during school time. Yeah, I have one more semester for you to go.
Yeah.
What I was gonna say though about the Danish or the Danes or being unfriendly, or I sorry, grumpy.
Pastry is Danish,
Right,
okay, and the
right.
people are Danes.
Okay, good. Right, right. So them being grumpy, I know I saw a picture online where it shows a map of Europe, and on this map of Europe, you have a pretty much a gradient color going from, and then
Okay.
from the top, it starts with blue, and then it's working its way down to all the way to Southern Europe to down to Greece, and it turns red. And these colors, blue means if you were to visit them, the owner that you're visiting or the person that you're visiting, they're most likely to give you food. and red mean I mean, sorry, they're not likely to give you food, and red means they are likely to give you food. And the more north you go, the less likely they're likely to give you food during a visit, and the more south you go, the more likely
They
they are.
do that, Bidzina. I thought you would know this. They do that because they're doing the visitor a favor. The further north you go in Europe, the worse the food is. I mean, it can be
Oh,
so incredibly bland. I used to travel around Northern Europe carrying salt and pepper shakers in my front pocket because I just knew I would have to spice up whatever it is. I mean, oh, this is really, you got to be careful with it because it could be really hot. Yeah, right. So I think it's just all done as a just as a nice pleasure. It'll, like they're just looking out for you. They don't want to
yeah,
give you the food.
it's a way to save face for them, huh? Or
I
something like
think
that.
so. That
Yeah,
well, yeah, yeah.
I don't
Or else they're just not very friendly. No, I'm not doing a good job of selling this trip to Denmark. We do have a few people in the city of Calgary who say they're going to be over there, and I'm going to meet up with them while there. So I think you'd probably have a lot of fun. I'm going to spend a few days. Copenhagen is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and Denmark is one of the nicest places you could ever visit. When I was traveling around in Europe on one of my trips, I remember being anywhere really south of Denmark, anywhere. Everybody's yard was seriously fenced in with chain fencing and a gate and everything locked up just to keep people from wandering in onto their property and causing mischief or damage. But when I got into Aarhus and other parts of Denmark, I was just so impressed that people had carports with their vehicles parked in them, and they had grass growing all over, right up to the edge of the road. Now, grass isn't necessarily a good thing, but this was 20 years ago, and grass was, like, okay, we grow grass to look pretty. But the point is, nothing was fenced in. Everything was open. It just felt like a heavy load was taken off when you got to Denmark because people just seemed to be more peaceful, more trusting, and you felt like you're not going to have very many problems here. And yes, in southern France, near the German border, my car was broken into and I had a lot of stuff stolen. But in Denmark, I was able to park, without even locking up the vehicle. It was just
mm.
such a difference in culture.
Yeah, just a little side note. I guess we'll kind of move on to the Denmark point, but the world's economies, majority of the world's economies, the first world, third world, whatever you can pick the country, they've stagnated in GDP per capita growth. So people's incomes have stagnated in the last 5 years, ever since COVID. But with the exception of Denmark, Norway, and the United States, of course, and then a bunch of handful of countries. But Canada and Germany and all these Western European nations, with the exception of Denmark, their GDP per capita stagnated since COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that is rather true. I don't know how good a measurement of GDP is for the well-being of a people
That's
because,
true.
you can have a very high GDP because you've got half a dozen multi-billionaires and you've got, you know, 95% of the population with an equity of less than $100,000 and an income of $40,000 per family. So I'm talking about the United States there, of course. So they look good on paper because you average that together and say, oh man, things are really good there. The other thing with GDP is get this in your head, just a bit of a picture. Let's say that you let's say that you have a lot of theft, like a lot of people are stealing things. So then
Right.
you run out and you build these security fences, you put up cameras, you um, arm yourself with guns, and all of that contributes to the GDP. of an economy. It all makes the GDP look better because people are out there spending money. They're buying, and somebody has to build, they have to make those guns, somebody
Right.
has to put up those fences, somebody has to run the software for the security cameras that we've got all over the houses. So there are places where we measure GDP, including everything that is involved in the economy, but so much of it is total waste. Again,
Well,
another example could be, oh, go ahead. I'm monopolizing here.
no, no, no. That is actually it's a really good note or like point to bring up. It doesn't really tell the full picture, but what I'm specifically talking it's the GDP per capita. So they're saying like this is like per person, like the income, the average income that in theory could be generated.
Not in theory, it's what's actually
Well,
generated.
yeah,
You count up
yeah,
everything
yeah.
and divide it by the population. But I think that that's what we want to avoid looking at when we're trying to describe how well off one country or another country is. For example, here in Canada, our insurance and our taxation rates for property and for other taxes, actually for corporations, because I own a couple of corporations, and our tax rates are minuscule. And there, that's money, and our property tax is probably about a third of what it is for an equivalent house almost anywhere in the United States. So um, that GDP part is, when
It's
you
hard.
divide
Yeah,
up, yeah, when you're dividing up stuff that people have to pay for, like you have to buy that expensive insurance in the United States,
right.
or
That's
in
right.
other
You
parts of the
life
world.
is a lot more expensive and they have to pay everything in American dollars, which is that
They don't
you know
have
that
to. I think they're allowed to use Bitcoin almost everywhere now.
interesting. But uh
I'm just kidding.
well no that might be this that might be the case, but not everywhere, but in probably a lot of places, but the just I don't know, kind of since we're kind of talking about this, so the poorest state in the United States, Missouri, is
Mississippi.
or Mississippi, yeah, one of those two,
It's
maybe,
not
yeah,
Missouri.
maybe,
Missouri
yeah.
is
So,
probably probably right about in the very middle of
okay, okay.
wealth.
I'm sorry. Then I'm probably thinking of Mississippi. Um, they have it's the same as like that. Their lowest is our highest. Well, not our
Of
highest,
what?
but our country's average.
Oh,
Again, that GDP number, GDP per capita. The
so I've driven
income.
around.
Yeah.
I've driven around Mississippi, and some of the nicest people in the entire world, and some of the best cooking, best food. I lived in the South for a while. I love that part of the world. But honestly, Bidzina, it's a poverty-stricken area compared to Canada, compared to almost any part of Canada. And again, it's because of the way we divide up those numbers. We look at the very few wealthy and the very many poor, and those few wealthy are enough to nudge up that GDP, but we also count in things like handguns, like any kind of weaponry that we just don't have here. We're not spending $1,000 every year or two on weapons to defend ourselves, and there they probably have to. Things have gotten pretty rough, so that's not part of our economy at all. So that's a chunk that's not there. Also, our average payments to doctors. I mean, doctors here are really underfed. They're hurting. Their average income is only $350,000 a year. I'm being sarcastic. That's plenty of money. If you want to pursue any sort of a business, and 10 years into the field, you're able to make money like that. So that's what Canadian doctors make. But I had a friend when I was growing up on a farm. He became a surgeon, actually, no kidding. He visited us almost every Sunday. He and his family would come out. And one day, my father asked his father, okay, so I'm going to use the name X. No, I shouldn't use X. I don't like X anymore. I'll use the name Y for this
Yeah.
guy. So Y is out of university and he's practicing as a doctor. And my father asked his father and said, so what's why making these days? I know it's, I'm just curious, like what kind of income? Is it like 80,000? This was a few years ago, quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
And Y's father said, no, he makes $800,000 a year. That's what, here they make 350,000 doing exactly the same work. He would make 800,000 a year. But then Y's father says, but Andy, don't forget, he pays over half of that in insurance, like liability insurance for making a mistake because he's operating on brains. And people would sue so much. And then all of his overhead, his costs are so much higher that in the end, he is making more than he would make if he moved to Canada. He's making much more. But, that makes, and oh, this is gonna kill you. Y and his parents, when he was about maybe 15 years old, 16 years old, they all moved from Pennsylvania to live in Mississippi. So he was
Mm.
a Mississippi brain surgeon. Very nice family, oh, wonderful people. Really like those guys were really great. And but that's not an unusual example. You can make a lot of money doing something in the United States, but you need that to protect yourself from the lawyers and protect yourself from the insurance companies. So they, again, contribute to the GDP.
Right.
So yes, Mississippi has a higher GDP than even the province of Alberta, which is the wealthiest province in Canada. So they're way up there, but you don't see many people rushing off to go live in Mississippi. It's because it's not that equal of a society anymore. It was
Well,
more when I was
yeah,
younger.
I guess I should say as well that if you are disadvantaged, you're not one to go to the United States. Well, not I shouldn't even say disadvantage. I should say, um, if you're looking for a social safety net, the United States doesn't have one other than even their police, though, and their ambulance and their fire is a little bit regional. So yeah, everything is privatized there, and you got to be well off. You got to be like, and that's kind of, I think they do it on
I
purpose
don't I don't
because,
think everything is privatized in the United States. And
well,
prisons,
I
yes.
mean, not
A
private,
lot of
not
schools, yes. Yep.
not privatized, but I mean, like, they have a lot of states' rights, so that it's there's no federal, like, sure, there are certain federal, like, policies and guidelines that need to be followed, but there's a lot of individual specific things that you find in regions like just state to state, neighboring states
Yeah. Yeah.
with counties and stuff. I don't know, maybe you know better than me. I'm just kind of talking off anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, it is pretty hard for the average person in the United States these days and has been probably for the last 15 or 20 years. I'm not going to blame it on any particular recently elected president, but it's an ongoing issue. And one of the things that really hurts the folks down there is this lack of a universal health care coverage. Now, you hear people say, "Oh, healthcare is free in Canada." Nothing is free. The doctors have to be paid something. The hospitals have to be paid something. It's
Yeah,
not free. Instead,
someone's
it's
got
a
to pay for
super huge insurance company. You pay insurance to the government. The government then creates these hospitals and uses that. It's kind of like what they call HMOs now in the States. It's almost the same thing, but this is on a bigger scale and more equitably applied. So we do have costs associated with our healthcare. Somebody has to pay that, but it's about, I saw the statistics lately. I think Canadians pay $4,000 or $5,000 a year, and Americans pay $8,000 or $10,000 a year for their health care. On
I
average, that's
I
yes.
mean, well, yeah, the pharmaceutical topic too is kind of interesting. How Donald Trump has made that his one of his policies to be reelected is to get better prices for pharmaceuticals. And I guess
Oh, I
it
hope he
is,
does. I hope he does.
if he does, but like what I mean is, like, yeah, Canada does have really good prices on pharmaceuticals, and probably because that's got to do with the government negotiating it on behalf of the people.
Yeah, and that's what they're trying to do in the United States now. That I think they were trying to put that through.
But
Anyway,
well, wouldn't that become kind of like uh socialized healthcare that they're to talk, because now the government, I don't know actually.
well, it would be. It certainly would be. And even all those congressmen and representatives, senators who vote against health care for everybody else, they have the most incredible personal health care paid through the federal government as an addition to their wages. So they are getting government paid life or health insurance. And I almost said life insurance. And the reason I almost said that is because what you want to look at for healthcare is the outcome. And since we pay half of what the Americans pay, we have to come to the recognition, and we have to admit that people in Canada in general live half as long as people in the United States because they spend twice as much money on their healthcare. They live twice as long. Like, in the United States, I think the average life expectancy right now is about 75, and up here in Canada, it's only around 82 years. Oh, no, wait, that means that we're better off.
Yeah, I'm like,
Paying less money.
where is he
Oh,
going
okay.
with this?
Oh yeah, no, I got that. No, I was trying to make a joke, but the point is, we're not suffering in our health care, and I know because I've been in and out of hospitals often enough that if I were an ordinary small business person, I would have been broke long ago. So I really appreciate that they get me back on my feet. I'm living longer than most people with the conditions that I have got will ever hope to live. And I have been able to continue to contribute to the Canadian societies. I'm trying to pay it back. I've just got to pay it back. That's just the way I feel. They're good to me. I should be good to them.
Yeah, pay it forward somehow.
Pay it forward. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
pay it
right.
forward.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of
All right.
paying it forward, why don't we talk about packaged bees?
Yes, let's move forward.
All right. Okay. So the first thing I have are a series of graphs, and these graphs are um, basically, well, here's one that's the pounds of honey per hive in Alberta from 1920 to 2017. And if we ignore the first like 30 years or so, from 1920 to about 1945 or 1950, you just throw them out because they're so erratic. They look like a heart patient's readout after they've been skipping a few beats and exercising way too hard. If things smoothed out quite a bit more as you go further along the line. But here's what I want to point out. I want us to notice that the average production of pounds of honey per hive has been between 100 and 150 pounds, sometimes topping 200 pounds per hive occasionally. And it doesn't matter if it was from the year 19, say, let's just go back to something that's where things are kind of similar to today. So we'll go back 60 or 70 years. So say 1960, okay? So in
Yeah.
1960, Alberta's average honey production was 170 pounds per hive for every hive across all of Canada. And 95 to 99% of all those colonies of bees were packages that were brought in the spring, put into equipment, allowed to build up, honey harvested, and then the next year more packages brought in. And so basically from the 1st of September, or maybe the 15th of September, until the next spring, the number of the colony loss in Alberta, Canada was 0 because bees weren't dying because you put them to sleep before that point. And you started with fresh bees every year. Now, fresh bees means that the bees are not carrying or harboring American foul brood or these days mites or chemicals in their combs. So they
Right.
start fresh every year with fresh bees that have 0 or close to 0 varroa infestation, probably very, very, well, for sure, very, very, very low virus infections. You can put a package of bees in today into a colony of bees in Alberta and not treat them the whole summer. You could just put in a fresh new package, put it in your backyard and let it go. And then in the fall, your mite populations probably build up so much that your bees will die over winter. So that's where you could make a decision of, do I let them suffer and die in the cold, or do I make it a quick death for them? Either way, it's horrible, but these are options. Now, more recently on this graph that people who are watching on YouTube are able to see, they can see that from about more recently, the production average has mostly been between 110 pounds up to about 190 per hive across the
Right.
province, and the oscillation is becoming less. Now, these are mostly overwintered hives because people are, unless they lose colonies and have to replace them with packages, then they are overwintering their colonies and using those. So the production difference is 0. There's no difference between the period of time. Actually, I should look for a, uh, like I should do a regression analysis and actually, so I can confidently state this, but the difference in average production when people were using the majority packages to the time when they were using majority overwintered colonies, the production per hive is the same. The only thing that's really different is that there's the uncertainty of how your bees are going to make it through winter. There's the feeding the bees sugar to get them through winter. There's the extra chemical treatments that you need to keep them healthy, which you would not need if you were using packages. Anyway, I thought was interesting to see
Uh,
these official Statistics Canada numbers. Yeah.
So these numbers,
Question me.
yeah, they
Push
got
back. Push back.
yeah, they got you started collecting in 1920. That's, I'm assuming, or is
Yes.
this just okay? What
Yeah.
happened in 1930 with that spike? Well, actually, I should say the spike in
Okay. Okay.
1925.
That's an excellent question. And it's a little different from the topic we wanted to explore today, but until about 1930, or let's say maybe 1925, in around that time in Alberta, there was a minuscule amount of clover and there was no canola whatsoever. So the clover and alfalfa really didn't exist here. The type of ranching that was done is people would flood a grassy meadow, let the grass grow, and then harvest it. It wasn't until around the 1925 mark where the farmers, ranchers, were actually physically out there seeding and planting sweet clover,
Hmm.
alfalfa, and other types of clover. So there was nothing for the bees to work on. So the average before 1925, 27, somewhere in that range, before that point, the average production in Alberta was only about 40 pounds per hive. And that was honey gathered almost entirely from wildflowers. And as
Right.
we've been talking in other times when we've been exploring this issue, honeybees don't really like North American wildflowers. They're not very productive for the honeybees. What's productive are those agricultural crops that originated in Europe, and that includes clovers. And more recently, since the around 1980 or a little before that, canola. But
So, uh,
that's, yes.
I see. So that explains it. Actually, that
Yes.
makes a lot of
So they
sense.
had nothing to
But
eat. They had nothing
right,
natural to eat until around 1927 and then 1930. So those of you who are listening and unable to watch the podcast at this moment, the graph I've got starts at around 1920, and the honey production average per hive in Alberta was around 30 pounds, pushing up to 40 pounds for several years in a row. And then it broke through past 50 pounds, not quite to 100 pounds by about 1927. And then in 1930, the average production per hive was almost 220, 230 pounds. That's
yeah.
for every colony of bees. There weren't a lot of colonies of bees in Alberta at that time, but every colony of bees was producing a huge bumper crop for the first time. And
There
that's
was a
because,
yeah.
yeah, that's because the clovers and alfalfa were planted by the ranchers to take care of the bees.
So clover is what's up with clover? Why are ranchers obsessed with it?
Oh, you'd have to ask a rancher. But
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with sweet clover, which is not really 100% the same family as, say, Dutch clover or Alside clover. It's a
Right,
little
sweet
bit of a
clover.
different.
Let
Yeah.
me see.
So sweet clover has very deep roots. It can withstand drought. It's a biennial. So the first year it takes root, it establishes, it's a tiny little plant that does not bloom. But the second year, it can burst out into these huge 2 meter, 6 foot tall, lanky plants that are covered with thousands of flowers. And these produce a lot of honey.
Did
Alfalfa
a
also
whole
produces a lot of honey.
we did a
Yeah.
whole episode on sweet clover, I believe, right?
That's right. We did.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
did.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's
But
my
I see.
obsession. That's my obsession with sweet clover. I don't know if
But
anybody else has that obsession. Why don't we move on? We've got
yeah, let's move
a
on.
few other slides to talk about, and as I said, I have several uh, graphs, plots that I'd like to show. So the number of colonies of bees in Alberta from 1925 until, well, I stopped my records at 2017. I should get more information since then because we're kind of holding our own at over 300 to 350,000 colonies of bees these days. But you can see that, we didn't reach 5,000 colonies of bees total that were registered that we knew about, and that would probably be most all of them, until about the 1940s. So 1945, 46, 47, the numbers went up and then they went back down again. So that was during the war years, and there were more hives kept in Alberta for a few years during World War II. And then the numbers of colonies of bees has pretty much grown very steadily from about 1955. Over the last 70 years, they have just, you could almost draw a straight line with one notable exception. Around 1985, the number of colonies of bees kept in Alberta dropped by over 50,000. And that's because the border was closed and people could not bring their packages in anymore. So a lot of people went out of business, they went bankrupt. They cut back the number of colonies they could take care of. They tried wintering, a lot of them died, then they had nothing the next spring. So it took only, let's see, from 1980, I'm just looking at the graph, from about 1988, the population of kept honeybee colonies in Alberta fell significantly, but it recovered only about 15 years later. We were back to the same number of kept colonies of bees in Alberta again. So it took that long for beekeepers, 15 years, to adjust, to be able to get through this period where they couldn't bring in as many packages as they used to, or they had to
Mm.
develop packages out of other places. There's a cute picture here. What do you see
I
within the
see
graph?
I see a black and white picture of a lady holding there's three packages and she's holding one of them up. Is that what's going on?
That's what we're seeing. Yeah, we're seeing a woman who looks like I think the photograph was from the 1920s, by the way, from the American Bee Journal, and it was a I don't know, some miscellaneous beekeeper who was showing the packages that were arriving at her door. And that cage is still very similar to what we use today. So in this case, it's mostly wooden, but it has the screens on the sides. The size is about the size of a toaster. That hasn't changed very much over the years. We still need about the same volume of space for the bees. The top is where the bees go in when they're being filled by the shipper and where they get dumped back out by the receiver, and also where food is put inside of the cage with these bees. And you've put in some packages, haven't you, Bidzina?
No, I have never uh have bought a package.
Okay, okay. Well, so maybe you should start doing that. You could consider that maybe at some point. But
I
anyway,
am considering it to do
Mhm.
that, but the the little update from my beehive for including the two that that are yours in your backyard. So there was 15 that we overwintered, and then 13 made it, including yours. So
Yeah, okay.
and then the 7 in my yard are all alive, and they're very healthy.
Oh, good. Good. That's good to
Yeah,
hear. Great.
but
Great.
we'll see how
I
March
hope
goes.
Yeah, we'll see how March goes, but that's really good news. So the number of colonies of bees in Alberta, just in about 100 years, and not quite more than 100 years, has gone, or almost 100 years, I should say, has gone from almost zero up to about 350,000 colonies of bees. And that certainly could be interpreted as a real issue for native wild bees that have been here all along, except for the very significant fact that almost all these honeybees are working on agricultural crops. So the bigger culprit in destroying the native bees, the wild bees, would be monoculture farming, where you've got wheat fields that never even have pollen or nectar that can be collected by bees of any sort. And they cover, vast thousands and thousands and thousands of square kilometers of land. And on that land, at one time in the past, there was a very significant biodiversity, which included wild bees. Those are not there anymore. But where the farmers did plant alfalfa, sweet clover, and canola, honeybees are taking advantage of that. So this huge number of honeybees kind of follows the same trajectory as the growth of agriculture in general inside of Alberta.
Yeah, this is a hockey stick if I've ever seen one.
That one was. So now we
Yeah.
have another image, and it's the number of beekeepers in Alberta for the past 100 years. And I think this is really pretty cool. What stands out to you when you look at this graph of the number of beekeepers in Alberta?
Well, I was gonna say I see a picture of little Ron holding a frame of bees.
Yeah, that's not me.
Oh,
I don't think color photography existed when I was that small, but that's one of my sons.
right.
So that's
But yeah, sorry.
Daniel.
Yeah.
That's Daniel, whom you have met and whom we have interviewed a couple of times on here. So besides the photograph that's embedded into this chart, and
Yeah.
again, I urge people to go to the YouTube channel and look at the charts.
Yes.
Besides that,
So okay. So again, we have this data starting in 1925, going all the way to 2015, and it's pretty. We have the beekeepers in Alberta. The number that's the title of the chart, and it's steady. Fairly, it's almost zero for the first 10 years, and then you have 500, maybe then you have 2000, and then there's huge spike of beekeepers from the period of 1941 to 1951, where there was almost 12,000 almost 11,000 beekeepers pretty much in Alberta, which is which is kind of the same amount of the number as beekeepers we have in total in Canada right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it drops right in 1951, and again we just have the same 1,000 to 2,000 beekeepers steady
Yes. And
line.
steady number throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way through. Our number of beekeepers in Alberta has been somewhere between 1 and 2,000 beekeepers. Those are individual people who register as keepers of bees, and people up here tend to register. Like it's unless you're like me and you get months behind in sending in your paperwork, but in general, people will register what they've got, especially the bigger beekeepers, because there are some perks in being a registered beekeeper, information about disease outbreaks and problems, and also some communication with other beekeepers is available to you then if you register your own bees. So that's about the number. I kind of trust these numbers a little, to a large extent. Now, back in 1939 until 1950, I can't remember what was going on as a world event that Canada was significantly involved in.
Yeah, we might have to look at the history books, but I'm guessing is that have to do with World War II.
Good. Yeah, it
Okay.
does. It does. Yeah, Canada came into World War II in 1939. And then then rationing took place because we were so short on materials and equipment and food supplies to feed those. Suddenly we had 1 million soldiers. How do you feed them? What do like, how do you take care of them? And the sugar then became one of the rationed products. And some people, oh, I hate to say this because these are Canadians living here in Alberta, but some people got a hive of bees in order to be able to go to the government and say, I have a hive of bees. I need a sugar ration, a sugar ration card so I can go and buy some sugar for my bees and also for my puddings and pies. But they never mentioned the puddings and pies. It's for their bees. So people were getting bees, 12,000, 11,000 people in Alberta suddenly became beekeepers because that gave them access to a product that was in short supply. Now, talk about greedy and selfish. If it had really legitimately been, let's feed our bees, there wouldn't have been a spike in the number of beekeepers. That still would have been around 2,000 people, 1,500 before the war, 1,500 after the war. That's the number of people who were legitimate beekeepers during that period. All the rest were in it in order to be able to buy sugar. I mean, that's
Now,
that's
it
sad.
it is pretty sad. I'm wondering if these people that did this just to get these rations, let's say if they actually did it to support the war effort and have a surplus of honey and become a beekeeper, I'm wondering if they could put a dent in the prices of honey. I mean, sorry, in the price of sugar and other sweets by flooding the market with cheap honey.
No, no.
No,
Numbers just aren't there. The numbers aren't
right.
there. And also, I don't know if I go back a couple of slides. Let's just go back here to um, pounds of honey produced from 1940 to 1945. It's about the lowest in the
Mm.
last 80 years. There's a period there with all these new Alberta beekeepers not really producing much honey at all. They were getting an average of about 80, 90 pounds per hive. And then after the war was over and these make-believe beekeepers gave up, then the real beekeepers were still around, and then the honey production average was back up between 100 and 150 pounds consistently again. So this answers your question pretty clearly.
So I
They
guess
were
so this chart is doing pounds per hive. So those beekeepers would have to say that, hey, I have a hive.
Right.
And so in that time period from 1940 to 1950, there was 11,000 beekeepers that were saying that they had a hive, but they might report no honey being produced.
That's right. They might. I'm expecting that somebody, some World War One elderly veteran, went around and checked to actually see that they had live bees and took them off the program if they did not. So they would have had to bring in some bees from somewhere, but they
Right.
weren't taking care of them. Or they
Right,
were
right.
putting them in areas that were completely surrounded by wheat fields.
Yeah.
And, but that didn't matter. They were still given uh, those
Rations.
coupons in order to buy, sugar. And now, hives per beekeeper, which I think is something you were asking me at one time, that maybe we're at a point where, there are too many colonies per beekeeper. I don't see that being an issue on any of our other graphs because the production has been about the same regardless of the number of hives per beekeeper. Right now, the average of all the beekeepers in Alberta is about 350 colonies of bees. Well, it was back maybe in 2010. Then when people wanted to start saving the bees and getting all these extra colonies of bees, then uh, there were so many new beekeepers with one colony of bees. When you average them in with the guys who've been around forever with 2,000 hives of bees, that brought the total average down significantly to the point where today it's around 200 pounds per,
Two.
sorry,
Yeah.
200 hives per beekeeper in Alberta.
Right.
And that's an average. That's an average of a bimodal distribution. So we have a huge number with very few colonies of bees and a significant number with a lot of colonies of bees and almost nobody in between. So this big peak of the people keeping one or two colonies of bees averages in with these people with a lot of colonies of bees, and we come up with an average of about 350. I think it's a lot more meaningful to say that the average hobby beekeeper in Alberta has 4 colonies of bees. And I think that's a pretty close average if we take everybody that has, say, 50 colonies of bees or fewer. So those
Mm.
people have an average of about 4 colonies of bees. And then the people who are commercial beekeepers have an average of about 2,000 colonies of bees. So that's kind of,
This
yes.
this is this is almost like that GDP per capita number that we were discussing.
Yeah, you good point. Very good point. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm kind of showing here that we're bringing in a lot of packages. We've got a lot of beekeepers, and the packages production per hive didn't seem to change when we switched over from packages to overwintered colonies. The average production is still very consistently the same. And it was also interesting to take the little side trip about the beekeepers keeping more bees in during World War II because of getting these ration coupons that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So now we'll talk about the actual bees. And Bidzina, have you ever had a chance um, to fill packages on the other end, like where the packages come from?
No, I've never done any of this. Like, when you said, yeah, you're like a first year beekeeper, you have like the enthusiasm of a first year beekeeper. That's how I feel really, because when I started 5 years ago, I started it with a completely different mindset. It wasn't really, it was a business. Now I'm more of a beekeeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So no, I've
Yeah.
never done any of these things. So like consider
Oh,
me like a first year beekeeper.
you know what? You could hop on a plane next year after you finish your degree and go down to New Zealand. And that's such a gorgeous place to go to and spend 4 or 5 months, room and board, maybe a little stippet, and enough to cover your flights, and learn how they raise queens and learn how they produce packages. So we're looking at a photograph now that I took. No, I didn't take it. I'm the guy in the very front there that's holding the end of the hose.
It
Uh, so somebody
looks like
took of
you're
me.
It looks like you're in some alien gizmo. You're holding.
Yeah, I am. I'm all dressed up because the bees can be extremely irritated when you start wrecking them by going through the colonies and removing excess bees in order to have packages. So, one of the things I did every year for several years in a row was to shake, as they call it down there, shake my own packages or fill my own packages or create my own packages. I would raise the queens myself, and I would make these packages from colonies of bees that had just finished producing honey on the citrus bloom. So the citrus, the oranges, would be finished by about April 1st. And then I sometimes moved my bees further north in Florida, so they had a secondary flow to work on. And then I would go out with a few friends and we would blow air like a leaf blower that was rigged up to blow bees out of the frames and down a sliding board and into a big box or big cage. It was a wire screen cage. And from that cage, we would shake those bees out of that cage. And these would be from multiple colonies of bees. I mean, everything was so confused. The bees were it was pretty traumatic, I'm sure, for a few hours for these bees, but they settled into becoming a family really quickly. And they cluster together and they create, the package that is eventually going to be received. Like we saw of that woman from 100 years ago. In those days, 100 years ago, they would have gone over to a funnel that sat on top of a wooden box, the package, and that package box was sitting on a scale, and somebody would brush bees off of the combs, one comb at a time, down the funnel and into that cage until somebody said, "Okay, we got 2 pounds," and then they'd stop brushing. They put a lid onto that wooden cage and put another one in the same spot, and somebody would be bringing another comb of bees to be brushed off. It can be done very gently. Brushing is not that tough on the bees. The blowing is much quicker. We were able to fill the packages I needed in one day because that same evening I would start driving, and I would drive on a truck that looked a bit like this. And now this is in Saskatchewan. So we're looking at another photograph, and my truck um, is just a two-axle, dual-wheeled in the back, and it's got cages of packages. And when I arrived in my final location with my packages, I would quickly unload all the packages into a cool shed, give them a bit of water because they are dry and sugar water too. And then they would stay there while I would go out with one or two local kids who are working for me, and we would put out these boxes. So we put out these Langstroth colonies, Langstroth beehives. And from each hive, we would remove 3 combs out of the center. And then I would be out there with the packages, and we would shake the bees out of those cages and into these boxes, and they would constitute a new colony. So that was kind of the system there in a nutshell. This photograph was taken quite a few years ago, back in the 80s when I had the big honey farm in Saskatchewan. This is from one of the honey farms I had outside of Calgary, and one of my older brothers was running it for me because by then I couldn't really physically do that much. But what I wanted to show here is we have now our packages being placed inside of their single depth, same as before, single depth boxes, and a bit of insulating material around them to keep them warm. They were put on pallets, and the pallets were sometimes lined up a little differently from each other so the bees wouldn't get lost very easily. And then this is how they got started. And this is in Alberta now, not Saskatchewan. You see, we're closer to the mountains. We don't have those really dry, rugged badlands with all the cactus and sagebrush. Instead, we've got the kind of aspen trees and some Walker poplars and so on. So, and what happens then? You bring in your package, it builds up for about a month. You put supers on it, and you make your honey crop. So these
Yeah.
came from packages. Okay, so what we're looking at finally in this most recent photograph is a young lady, one of my daughters, standing next to a colony with 3 deep brood chambers. I was experimenting with using 3 by then. So I had built the colony up into 3 deeps and then put on 5 honey supers above, and they were doing well. And that's from package.
So you were overwintering 3 deep supers, or that was just what the
That
spring
was
built?
going to go into winter. That's right. That's right. They were
Yeah.
going to go into winter. They start out as packages, and then I tried. I like wintering in doubles better than 3. I have a friend who absolutely 3 stories. You got to have 3 stories solid with honey. But his apiary with about 30 colonies of bees is so isolated that he probably can't reach it until the end of May because of snowdrifts. It's towards
Mm,
the mountains, and it's just in an area that it's just better for him to have them well stocked for the winter.
right.
So,
That's a good point.
Bidzina,
That's a
yeah, the next 15 or 20 minutes, I thought I would rocket through
yeah.
some of what goes on when people start with their packages. So, you order packages. I tried to make the point that they're going to do as well as any other colony, even as well as an overwintered colony, and probably better. And to get them off to a good start, you remove 3 combs from a waiting box and have some combs of drawn out frames waiting for the package. A feeder. There's a feeder in this photograph. So it's one of those Boardman in-frame feeders that you could put syrup into. And there's a spot where there's some frames missing. And that's where the bees are going to be dumped. So they're not being dumped on top of a full box of 9 frames. Some frames are removed, so the bees fall to the bottom of the box, and then they work their way up. So here we are with packages that came in from New Zealand just 3 or 4 years ago, actually 2018. So it's going to be a little longer. They arrived in April, the end of April. So these colonies went on to make roughly 100 pounds each, but it was all on foundation. I was starting all over again with a new equipment and new bees, and they had to draw out the frames. But we made close to 100 pounds per hive, but we did draw out the 4 boxes on each hive of
Man,
new wax. Yeah.
I just gotta say, you really do love these bees. Because here you are on the ground with no shoes on. It looks probably, I don't know what is it, September? Or I mean, sorry, this is early May or April,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, so it's
Right.
cold.
I have a
So,
sweater on.
yeah. And yeah, obviously you said you can't feel feelings, you don't feel sensation, but you're like
When did I say I don't feel any
uh,
sensations?
no, I mean in your feet, in your legs.
No, 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 no. My feet are partly paralyzed. My legs are paralyzed. But I still like you can pinch me or stick a knife into it, and I'll certainly tell you that it's there.
Okay, but you're almost like kind of like I want to say like a little kid just on the ground. Just
Oh,
he got his Christmas presents, just opening
I
them up.
did. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I thank you for that. That's absolutely how I felt. It was just so wonderful to be out there among those bees. And I just really enjoyed being able to do that. So here we are dumping the packages with my son. So it's how many, 6, 7 years ago. So he would have been about 15 or so in age. And he's shaking in the bees for me. I'm supervising. I'm holding a feeder that I pulled out of the box with my heavily gloved hand. Um, because I don't feel anything in my fingers, remember? Um, no, I I don't wear gloves. And and anyhow, we had a great time. It was a good, like I enjoyed doing this with him. And here's another picture where he's wrapping it up. Plus, the queen inside the cage rode with the bees. So you could immediately release the queen, and she starts laying eggs probably the next day. As soon as things quieted down, they were a happy family, and she's starting off with producing. But here's the really odd thing, and I just have to show this, is about a week later, 10 days later, we came back and it looked pathetic. You put a package of bees, 2 pounds, into this big 9-frame deep super or hive body. And yeah, everything is set. They've got some reserve honey. They're being fed. They've got a new queen. They're going to be fine. But when you do that and you look at it, you have to think that only a miracle could have help them make honey. Like
Yeah.
it just seems like such a long ways to go.
Yeah.
It's so
But
much nicer with that than an overwintered colony. I mean, I do have overwintered colonies and properly cared for, which I'm not that great at. Properly cared for, they can do really well. But often you will see a really nice, strong overwintered colony in early or mid-April, and it seems to be going downhill. Every time you go back, it seems a little weaker because the queen's older and the overwintered bees are starting to die off. And it does start to look a little bit weaker about that time of the year. Whereas your package by mid-May has enough brood already emerged, not by mid-May, but by the late part of May. There's enough brood that's emerging with all new young hardy bees, disease-free, no varroa in the hive yet, and they are looking so spectacular because they fill up that whole box wall to wall from a package within about 5 or 6 weeks. They just look, and they definitely need a second box by then. And then a month after that, they need honey supers, and they will fill them. So
so this
anyway.
is yeah, so that beehive that you just showed, that it became strong eventually, and it became it,
Yeah, I
it-
I
yeah.
might I might go through those pictures at another time because I
Okay.
did keep photographing every week the status of the colonies, but we're already past the time that I think we probably wanted to
Yeah.
go. And so we're getting into a lengthy discussion about packages and politics. So I think we're at a point where, hey, that might be the title for, instead of this about bees, it could be packages and politics. And I think that sometime we'll go through to a larger extent, like the rest of the season, or just kind of recap the whole season. But I do have one more slide, and it's a segue. This slide is showing us someone feeding on May 7th, refilling the feeder because the bees have taken down all the syrup already. Now, you don't see any bees wandering around on there, but they are there. We probably smoked them down a bit, but they ended up doing really well. And this is sugar, syrup being placed into a division board feeder. And I do like to feed wet syrup in the spring to give them a bit of a boost and to keep the colonies queen, producing lots and lots of eggs. So that's the way I would feed here in another month or so. But with exceptions, we have fed sugar syrup much earlier in the year. And I think the segue part is, I think next time you and I can have a discussion about what to feed bees. Why don't we feed honey to bees? What are some of the problems there? And how do you make feed if you want to make like a hard candy to put on in the early part of January when there's a nice break in the weather and you go out and you find all your bees are up there kind of trying to chew on the lid because they've run out of honey and they're at the top of the box instead of halfway down like they should be at that time of the year. Then how do you make that hard candy that you might put on the bees? How do you make fondant? So we'll
Right.
go through some of that at another point, but this is where I want to end, that packages need a lot of extra care in their first year by feeding them, but they will really, and you quit feeding them long before the honey comes in, like long before, because another 2 weeks after May 7th, the dandelions are blooming so much that if you put more sugar on a hive, they would ignore it. They don't want it. And then
Yeah.
it's not until July that they're actually making honey that you're going to be eating. So we don't have that risk of overlap between the sugar syrup and the honey production. But putting in some syrup early in the year when the colonies are still developing is not a bad idea.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, well, yeah, no, this has been an amazing discussion. We did go over time, and I'm sure you're gonna you'll find a way to make it better. There's parts that
Yeah.
were
You know, if I
far too
remove
sweet.
everything, if I remove everything that you have said, it'll probably save about a minute and a half out of this.
Ah, well, yeah, you're
I'm I'm monopolized. I am monopolized, and I should have given you more opportunities to talk about what you've seen. But you
that's
have
what
not put
it's
packages in. I'd really encourage you to try packages this year, at least
okay.
one or two, just for the experience, so that when you're talking to people about, the differences between nukes, overwintered colonies, purchasing new hives, or using packages, then you can kind of say from experience what you're thinking.
It would be nice to try out a package. I'm gonna have to see what I can do here. It's just
Hmm.
like, I gotta be very strategic with how I spend because I don't want to expand my beehive right now. I just want to focus on keeping the ones I have alive.
Right? Well,
Yeah.
sounds like you've been doing a pretty good job of that now.
Yeah, this has been a very good sign. Like I actually did, it's been a good year. But anyways, well, thank you everyone for listening. Join us next week for a fresh conversation about bees at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Um,
Or later, if it's me
or late.
posting a podcast, I sometimes I sometimes get way behind in getting these podcasts out on a weekly 8 a.m. Mountain Time basis. I try for that, but
You know,
I'm not always
I
as
I
diligent as you are.
I got a little bit jaded and didn't a couple of the episodes came out late because I'm like, oh well, nobody's even watching anyway, so it doesn't even matter if I release at 8 a.m. But no, that's the plan that we're sticking to. It's gonna work. I'm
Hmm.
telling you, one of these days, these videos are gonna go viral.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're helping a few people along the way.
Yes.
And I know that I get, you know, we get a few people who find it interesting to hear about how things are done in another part of the world, and particularly to hear some of our ideas about what's happening to the world in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
But yeah, thank you. Yeah, people are definitely like the one. I actually have a lot of gratitude to the ones that are listening. I shouldn't say that. It's just it's very hard to just look at because you never know if they're real or not. I don't know. It's 30, 40, but people that are listening, they are staying and interacting and engaging. So thank you everyone, and join us next week. Goodbye.
Yeah, bye, folks. Next week.
Bye.